What would you eat if you knew it was your last meal? A luxurious dish like lobster and steak, a hearty feast full of various meats, or something as simple as an olive? Throughout history, death row inmates have made some surprising requests for their final meals. Some have chosen extravagant meals so lavish they're hard to believe, while others opted for choices that sparked debates worldwide. In fact, some prisoners even caused lawmakers to change regulations due to their excessive demands. Today, we're going to dive into the most expensive last meals of death row inmates. Brace yourself, because this list will leave you shocked, unsettled, and perhaps even hungry. These were their final moments, and these are the last meals they chose. 1. Robert Dale Conklin, the most lavish meal. Robert Dale Conklin wasn't just a dangerous criminal. He was a ruthless killer with a chillingly cold method of execution. In 1984, he was sentenced to a suspended sentence for armed robbery, but that didn't stop him from committing further crimes. Conklin murdered lawyer George Crooks with a screwdriver, a simple tool, yet one that became a deadly weapon in his hands. And that wasn't the end of it. Conklin didn't just kill his victim, he dismembered him and disposed of the body parts in a garbage bag. An act so grotesque that even the most seasoned investigators were left shaken. 11 years later, when Conklin was sentenced to death, he remained calm and unfazed. His last meal was as lavish as it was puzzling. Lobster, steak, baked potatoes, asparagus soup, garlic bread, brie cheese, cake, apple juice, and Greek yogurt, all amounting to $92. Such a luxurious meal for a brutal killer. Does he really deserve it? Perhaps, in his final moments, Conklin simply wanted to enjoy the finest things before facing his most severe punishment. 2. Ronnie Lee Gardner, surf and turf and the Lord of the Rings. Ronnie Lee Gardner was a criminal with the cunning of a fox. He was first arrested in 1980 for robbery, but within a year, he had escaped prison, exploiting every weakness in the system. Instead of laying low, he continued his criminal activity. In 1984, during a scuffle at Cheers Tavern in Utah, Gardner shot and killed Melvin Otterstrom, an innocent bartender. But that wasn't all. When he was caught again and brought to court in 1985, he escaped once more. This time, Gardner didn't just try to flee. He planned to kill right in the courtroom. An accomplice secretly smuggled a gun into the courthouse and handed it to him as soon as he entered. Chaos ensued, and Gardner shot and killed attorney Michael Burdell on the spot. However, this time, he wouldn't be able to escape. After 25 years on death row, Gardner finally had to face the consequences. But before leaving this world, he requested a lavish meal: lobster, steak, apple pie with ice cream, and a can of 7-Up, totaling $62. What stood out most wasn't the food, though, it was his strange request. Gardner wanted to watch the movie The Lord of the Rings while eating his final meal. A murderer, sitting in his cell, enjoying a high-end seafood feast, while watching a movie about heroes battling evil. Was he seeking comfort, or simply trying to enjoy every moment before being executed by firing squad? 3. John Wayne Gacy, the Murderous Clown's KFC Feast. Imagine a man appearing at children's parties, dressed in a colorful clown suit, flashing a cheerful smile, and lighting up the atmosphere. But behind the disguise was a notorious serial killer. John Wayne Gacy wasn't just a murderer, he was a monster in human form. From 1972 to 1978, he raped and murdered at least 33 young men, hiding their bodies under his house. Some were buried under the floorboards, others thrown into the river. What's even more terrifying is that Gacy lived as an ordinary citizen. He ran a business, regularly participated in charity events, and even met with President Jimmy Carter. No one had any idea that this man was hiding a graveyard right beneath his home. In 1980, Gacy was sentenced to death, and after 14 years on death row, he faced execution on May 10, 1994. So, what did a serial killer like Gacy choose for his final meal? A bucket of KFC fried chicken, French fries, fried shrimp, and 1 pound of strawberries. totaling $43. Here's an interesting twist. Before he was arrested, Gacy was the manager of 3 KFC franchises in Iowa. Was he nostalgic about the past, or was he simply craving the familiar taste of his former life before meeting his end? But no matter what he ate, the outcome for him was inevitable. When asked if he had any last words, Gacy gave a cold, defiant response: "Kiss my ass." No remorse, no apology. He left this world with a smirk, a cruel joke for all who once believed he was a good man. For Oscar Ray Bolin Jr., the premium steak meal. Many serial killers have horrifying methods of execution, but few caused as much terror as Oscar Ray Bolin Jr. He didn't just kill one, but 3 young women in the same year, committing acts of brutality that would haunt even the most experienced investigators. In 1986, Florida was rocked by 3 brutal murders. The victims: Stephanie and Collins, 17 years old, Natalie Holly, 25 years old, and Terry Lynn Matthews, 26 years old, were murdered in savage ways. Their skulls were crushed, their bodies wrapped in sheets, and discarded in remote areas. Bolin almost got away with it, but in the end, he was exposed by his ex-wife. During a conversation, she revealed to her new husband the disturbing behavior of Bolin, bragging about his murders. This confession changed everything. 30 years after the killings, Bolin faced the death penalty. But when his final day came, he wasn't afraid. Instead, he requested a lavish meal: medium-rare ribeye steak, baked potatoes with butter and sour cream, tomato and cucumber salad, garlic bread, Coca-Cola, and lemon meringue pie, totaling $43. A premium steak for a serial killer. A last meal before he paid for his actions. But did he truly feel remorse? Or was it just a regular meal for someone who saw death as inevitable? 5. Timothy McVeigh, the cold mint ice cream meal. On April 19, 1995, a devastating explosion shook the entire United States. The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City was destroyed, killing 168 people, including 19 children, and injuring hundreds more. The culprit? Timothy McVeigh, a former U.S. Army soldier who meticulously planned the worst act of terrorism in U.S. history before September 11th. He believed the U.S. government had betrayed the people, and he sought revenge. He loaded explosives into a Ryder truck and detonated the bomb, turning the city center into rubble in an instant. Unrepentant, McVeigh was proud of his actions, even referring to the victims as collateral damage. He was arrested shortly after and sentenced to death in 1997, with his execution carried out in 2001. On his final night, McVeigh didn't request a grand or lavish meal. He asked for just 2 pints of chocolate mint ice cream, a request that was unsettling in its simplicity. Total value: $10. A man who killed hundreds of people, yet chose the simplest dessert for his last meal. A final meal that reflected his cold, emotionless nature. 6. Stephen Michael Woods, the giant meat feast. Some death row inmates opt for a light meal, others request just 1 dish, but Stephen Michael Woods was different. He wanted to eat everything he could, as if trying to enjoy his final moments with the most extravagant meal possible. Woods wasn't alone in his crimes. He and his accomplice, Marcus Rhodes, brutally murdered 2 young victims, Ron Whitehead, 21 years old, and Bethina Bross, 19 years old, in 2001. They shot the victims multiple times in the head before slitting their throats in a cold-blooded killing spree. After his arrest, Woods denied any wrongdoing, blaming his accomplice. However, evidence such as DNA traces and Rhodes' own testimony exposed his guilt. Woods was sentenced to death in 2002, while Rhodes received a life sentence. But what shocked everyone was Woods' final meal. He ordered a giant meat feast, including 2 pounds of bacon, a pizza loaded with meat, 4 pieces of fried chicken, 5 Southern-style steaks, 2 bacon cheeseburgers, French toast, breadsticks with marinara sauce, 2 pints of ice cream, and several sodas, including Mountain Dew, Pepsi, root beer, and sweet tea. The total value: $100. one of the most expensive last meals in history. He ate with enjoyment, seemingly uninterested in what awaited him. But no matter how much he ate, he couldn't escape the punishment that was coming. Hours after his final meal, Stephen Michael Woods was executed by lethal injection, ending the life of a cold-blooded murderer. And perhaps, when the poison entered his body, the giant meal no longer mattered. 7. Earl Forrest, the fancy steak meal. Earl Forrest was a cold-blooded criminal, and his story could easily fit into a film about murderers with particular motives. In 2003, Forrest was sentenced to death for the brutal killing of 3 people in a drug deal, including a deputy sheriff. His actions were swift and violent, leaving his victims with no chance to defend themselves. A man as ruthless as Forrest showed no remorse when facing death. When asked about his final meal, he chose something relatively simple yet refined: steak, pasta, tomatoes, cucumbers, fruit, chocolate cake, and milk, totaling $51. He may not have cared much about the meal, but it was certainly a notable choice for someone who had killed without conscience. Forrest entered the execution room with a cold, unwavering demeanor. But could this meal soothe any guilt inside him? Or was it just a final feast for a man who had no regret? 8. Richard Cooey, the restaurant feast. Richard Cooey was a terrifying criminal with a past stained by blood and violence. In 1986, he raped and murdered 2 college students in a horrifying attack. The police were able to apprehend him after gathering clear evidence from the crime scene, but what shocked everyone most was Cooey's attitude upon his arrest. He felt no remorse. Instead, he showed complete indifference toward his death sentence. On his final day, Cooey didn't opt for a modest meal. He requested a full restaurant-style feast, including a T-bone steak with A1 sauce, French fries, garlic bread, 4 eggs, Rocky Road ice cream, bear claw pastries, and Mountain Dew. The total cost of his meal, $35. It wasn't extravagant, but for a man like Cooey, it was enough to make him feel like he was getting a final taste of a life he was about to lose. Looking back, did this meal really ease the pain he inflicted on his victims? Or was it just a last indulgence before he paid the price for his actions? 9. Lawrence Russell Brewer, the excessively lavish meal. When you think of Lawrence Russell Brewer, the first thing that comes to mind is the horrific racially motivated crime he committed. In 1998, Brewer, along with 2 accomplices, brutally murdered James Byrd Jr., a black man, by chaining him to a truck and dragging him for miles, leaving the victim with injuries too horrific to describe. This case forced the American community to confront the issue of racism and the brutal actions of murderers. Given such extreme brutality, Brewer's last meal choice was a surprising one. He requested 2 Southern-style steaks, 1 pound of barbecue, 3 tacos, a triple cheeseburger, a slice of pie, peanuts, and ice cream, all totaling $81. But what was even more shocking was Brewer's refusal to eat his final meal, which led the state of Texas to ban inmates from choosing their last meals after this incident made headlines. He may have intended to mock the justice system, but in the end, it was him who had to face his punishment. The extravagant meal was just a fleeting indulgence before everything came to an end. 10. Peter J. Miniel, the buffet feast. Peter J. Miniel was a killer with no justification other than personal conflict when he murdered his victim. He stabbed the victim 39 times over a minor disagreement, and when arrested, he showed no remorse. The death of the victim wasn't just another murder. It was a horrific act of violence. Miniel made a peculiar request for his final meal. Instead of a lavish dish, he requested a full buffet feast, including 20 ribs, a T-bone steak, fried shrimp, mashed potatoes, brown gravy, sweet rolls, and ice cream, for a total cost of $74. It was a fitting spread for someone who felt no remorse for his actions. But what's most striking is that his victim would never have the opportunity to enjoy a final meal, while Miniel was allowed to indulge in these foods before he was put to death. 11. Ted Bundy, the Florida Standard Meal. When you think of Ted Bundy, it's impossible not to shudder at the horrors he inflicted. As a serial killer, Bundy raped and murdered at least 30 women between 1974 and 1978. He was highly intelligent and patient, often luring his victims by pretending to be injured or impersonating a police officer. With his charming demeanor and good looks, he easily gained the trust of young women, only to later attack and kill them. His method of killing, violent and cruel, meant many victims lost their lives without any opportunity to defend themselves. His crimes became some of the most infamous and haunting serial murder cases in U.S. criminal history. When facing execution, Bundy appeared surprisingly calm. Strangely, his last meal was a simple meal: steak, eggs, hash browns, toast, coffee, and orange juice, valued at $28. However, what stood out even more was that Bundy didn't eat anything. This action left many people questioning whether he couldn't stomach the remorse, or if it was just a way of displaying arrogance and defiance against death. Whatever the reason, this action only deepened the mysteries surrounding his personality. 12. Victor Feguer, the single olive. Sometimes, crimes don't need to be horrific or brutal to leave a mark in history. Victor Feguer is one such example. In 1961, Feguer killed a doctor after luring him to his home under the pretense of illness. Once the doctor arrived, Feguer shot him dead, simply to steal his victim's possessions. This wasn't a case of serial killing or a particularly complex crime, yet it was enough for Feguer to be sentenced to death. On the day of his execution, Feguer requested only one single olive as his last meal. This was all symbolic. Feguer hoped that an olive tree would sprout from his body, symbolizing peace, even though his death was the complete opposite of this notion. With a meal worth just $1, Feguer's final meal was a stark reminder of the grim nature of death. For him, the olive was all he could bring to his final journey. Could it be that in his last moments, he was simply seeking redemption through a seemingly simple act? 13. Thomas J. Grasso, the lavish yet controversial meal. Thomas J. Grasso was a ruthless killer, his crimes filled with brutal cruelty. In 1994, he murdered an 87-year-old woman with Christmas lights before killing an 81-year-old man just to steal his money. His crimes were not just simple murders, but acts with clear intent, marked by indifference and callousness toward his victims. However, on his last day, Grasso made an incredibly lavish request for his final meal: 24 steamed clams, 24 steamed oysters, a double Burger King burger, 6 barbecue ribs, 2 strawberry milkshakes, half a pumpkin pie, whipped cream, and strawberries, totaling $49. A fairly expensive meal, and certainly not like the typical requests of other death row inmates. What really stood out, though, was that when Grasso didn't receive SpaghettiOs, the meal he had originally requested, he became angry and complained, "I didn't get my SpaghettiOs. They gave me spaghetti." This incident sparked controversy. Why would a killer who took the lives of others request such an extravagant meal and complain when it wasn't exactly what he wanted? Could his frustration with the meal reflect his utter lack of remorse for the crimes he committed? This action certainly made people reflect on the price that must be paid for such brutal acts. 14. Brandon Jones, the last feast in Georgia. Brandon Jones was a criminal who committed one violent mistake. In 1979, while committing an armed robbery in Georgia, he killed a store employee. A murder in the midst of attempting to steal, but this act sealed his fate and led him down a path from which there would be no return. With a crime that couldn't be justified, Brandon Jones not only received a death sentence but also faced years of isolation in prison. After 37 years of waiting, his execution finally came on February 3, 2016. He didn't request anything extravagant for his last meal. Instead, he asked for steak, mashed potatoes, garlic bread, roasted vegetables, and ice cream, with a total value of $43. A simple meal, but enough to see him off to the end of his life. While the meal seemed peaceful, one question remains: was this his way of temporarily forgetting the crimes he had committed over the many years in prison, or was it simply a way to end his life with no remorse? Perhaps only Brandon Jones will ever know. 15. Christopher Brooks, The controlled meal. Christopher Brooks was a notorious criminal known for his brutal behavior, leaving a sense of outrage when thinking about the crimes he committed. In 1992, in Alabama, he raped and murdered a young woman in a savage manner. His crime not only shocked the public but also raised concerns about the existence of heartless murderers, completely devoid of remorse. When Christopher Brooks was sentenced to death in 1993, he faced the most severe punishment. However, unlike other death row inmates, Brooks wasn't allowed to choose his last meal. Alabama had a strict policy on controlling the requests of death row inmates, which meant he was only allowed the standard prison meals. Brooks' last meal consisted of a chicken sandwich, French fries, a salad, and vanilla pudding, with a total value of just $17. While there was no freedom of choice in his meal, this only highlighted the control and the helplessness of a criminal facing an inevitable fate. The story of Brooks shows that when faced with death, all he could do was accept what had been predetermined, with no choice left. Those simple meals were just a normal end to an abnormal life. So, we've walked through the last meals of death row inmates, where each meal is not just food, but a symbol of the closure of a life, of crime, and inevitable punishment. Some meals were lavish, while others were incredibly simple. Some inmates requested luxurious dishes like lobster and steak, while others asked for just an olive. No matter what the meal was, the brutal actions they committed still remained unchanged. From Ted Bundy, the cold-hearted serial killer, to Victor Feguer, the murderer with his strange hope for an olive tree to grow from his body as a symbol of peace. And there was also Thomas J. Grasso, who couldn't accept the change in his last meal request and caused a nationwide debate. These stories make us wonder, do last meals really mean anything to them? Or are they just a meaningless trade between death and one final moment of comfort? Crime and the final sentence will likely forever remain a topic of endless debate. So, what do you think about the last meals of death row inmates? Do we truly respect their right to choose their final meal, or is it simply another part of the punishment they must endure? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and share your perspective. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to catch more shocking, mysterious, and fascinating videos about the world of crime. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.